really do like to separate out the idea of website writing from marketing copywriting. And don't get me wrong, marketing copywriting can live on a website. But the difference is we need to understand that people look for content online differently. They read it differently. They want it to, help them complete a certain task, whether it is getting something done, making a decision, comparing, etc. And if you're not taking into consideration the digital environment within which people are encountering this content, then you are missing an opportunity and not, at the end of the day, serving your end reader or watcher.
Kristina Halvorson is the founder and CEO of Brain Traffic, a content strategy consultancy. She's also the author of Content Strategy for the Web, a book on content strategy, written actually in 2008-2009, with the second edition coming out in 2012, which is the copy that I have, and very much still relevant today. She is the producer of two conferences, the Confab Conference for Content Strategy Professionals, and Button, a conference for product content strategy, UX writers, and content design. Now, obviously, knowing her background, I've asked Kristina to be a guest on the Content Matters podcast to talk about content strategy. And she gave me, and she'll give you, the best definition of content strategy and the elements it comprises that I have ever heard. But that definition is just the beginning of that insightful conversation around not only content strategy, but UX writing, content design, and the need to focus on your customers so that you are building the great content-based experiences. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get to it. Thank you very much, Kristina, for joining us. I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited.
The first thing I'm going to ask you, and I've actually asked this of a few different people I've interviewed, so I'm kind of asking myself why I keep asking this question, but maybe because I get different answers all the time, which is fascinating to me. But from your perspective, what is the definition of content strategy and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, let's just kick it off with that.
Yeah, exactly.
So how has it evolved over the years? Well, I can share with you that this is going to be a little bit of a long answer because back in 2008, I can share with you that when I personally started to get my head wrapped around the idea that website content is more than just copywriting. Like we need to be considering all these different, pieces of it. And it goes so far beyond even just like filling out lorem ipsum in the wireframes. I need to go find other people who are talking about this. And there was actually hardly anything online in 2008. Like literally, I could count the number of articles on two hands. So I reached out to like the 16 people on all of LinkedIn calling themselves content strategists. And we started a conversation together. And one of the things we were saying is we've got to try to establish some kind of common ground when we talk about content strategy. And so out of all these conversations, when I wrote my book, Content Strategy for the Web, which was published way back in 2009, I kind of worked to distill them down to what I felt like was the simplest possible elevator pitch that you could provide. Because every time we would start talking about it, it would be this long, complicated, well, you got to consider this part of user experience and this part of, marketing and editorial, and then there's the structural considerations. And so what I threw out there was content strategy guides our planning for the creation, the delivery, and the governance of useful, usable content. So it was really a definition that was rooted in user-centered content, in user experience design, and acknowledging the fact that there were so many different people involved in the content lifecycle. And this, to this day, people are still kind of pointing at it as like, oh yeah, that's a de facto definition of content strategy. Well, of course, at the same time, literally in 2008, 2009, a conversation around content marketing was also on the rise. And so marketing has also really kind of adopted, some would say absconded with, this idea of content strategy is a thing that lives specifically within the marketing function of an organization. And you'll see that a lot. And another dynamic that was occurring way back in the 2000s was that there was the technical writing community and the structured content community, which was really the kind of one of the leading voices there, if not the leading voice, was Anne Rockley, who had written a book called Managing Enterprise Content, a unified content strategy. They were using the term content strategy to describe how you structured your content for effective management and distribution across an enterprise and across a content ecosystem. So there are all these converging definitions, right?
Yep.
And so that was where in the next version of my book in 2012, which I co-authored with Melissa Rock, Melissa had introduced, and we had kind of finessed within Brain Traffic, this idea of the content strategy quad, which we were working to kind of bring together these disparate practices to show that, look, content strategy has to be a framework and a function within an organization that makes sure that all of these different functions are talking to one another. So the brand portion of how we shape and talk about our products and services, and our company, the user experience design version, which is, how are people interacting with this content and these words and the video and audio, et cetera, online. The structured part of it, which is how are, which we call, I love the phrase content engineering. How are we engineering this content to make sure it's getting to the right people at the right time and in the right place, and that we're able to manage it in a way that is meaningful and scalable internally. And then kind of the operations piece of it, which is what are the tools and processes that we're using to make sure content goes and works correctly and that we all are talking together. That's a very big definition. I will wrap this portion of our program by saying that one of the things that's have been happening very, very rapidly, I would say just over the last even 18 months, which is that people are really coming together around, maybe 2 years, around content design and UX writing as very specific fields of practice, sort of within the larger function of content strategy at an organization. And those practices are exploding in the marketplace. Companies are like scrambling to find people who can do this work. But the concern, of course, is that is work that happens largely around the table with product design or across a series of products. And we don't want to lose the fact that content exists in a larger ecosystem defined by the customer journey. So so now I talk about website content strategy. I talk about content marketing programs and strategy. I talk about content design, UX writing, content engineering, and content ops. That is kind of where I see the practice of content strategy, the specialties and the deeper specializations converging.
That is like the best description or definition and explanation of how it works today that I've heard, which that's fabulous. Because usually,
I have what sucks is that everybody's like, you got to write that down, and I'm like, I know, but I'm so busy. So I'm like, listen to this podcast. Everybody can hear it there.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So, but that leads to a bigger kind of idea, is that one type of content strategist can't do all of that stuff, right? Like there's, I guess, like you said, there's specializations where a content strategist, a content marketer considers themselves a content strategist, but they do it in a certain kind of view of marketing. They don't do it in other stuff. So how do you know, if you're a person who wants to get involved in content strategy and they want to be a content strategist, how do you kind of know which way you want to go and how you get involved with it?
That is also an outstanding question, and one that I get. That is the second most asked question I get. The first most asked question is, how do I convince my boss that we need this in our workplace?
Yeah.
So, really, and frankly, I can speak from my own experience, because when these areas of specialization started to really sort of form, which I would point to, that they were kind of in a swirl as early as like 2012, 2013. I spent years turning myself inside out, like, oh, I've got to be an expert in all of these things. And people are really, I'm one of the people that folks look to, like, how do I make sense of this? And I've got to make sense of it. And really what it came back down to. And I will say that it was reflected on the copy that existed on the Brain Traffic website, or the content, which was my Brain Traffic is my company, and we do content strategy consulting and projects, and also produce events, which I think we're going to talk about later.
Yep.
But on our homepage, it was like, we do content strategy for websites, for marketing, for product design, and for the enterprise. Like, that's what it said at the top of our, and I was like, okay, yeah, we've covered all the bases now. But really what it came back down to is that what I personally, in my practice as a content strategist, am most passionate about, I'm very passionate about how content, how people work together to create and manage content within an organization, and kind of how they rally around principles and roles and ownership and accountability. I'm really interested in that. And I'm very passionate about content design for websites specifically. So, and that is because I care about two things that are rooted in that. I care very much about the end user of a website who gets so overwhelmed looking for information online specifically.
Mhm.
And I also am very passionate about the human beings that are wrangling with, I care about that person too, or I care about people that are using my product, or I care about people that I want to engage with marketing, but I don't know how to work together with all the other people in my organization who have an impact on the end product, the content that I need to get out to these people. So,
And that's a huge challenge, right? Like getting people across the organization, not so much to work together. I think a lot of people would want to do that, but how do you get them on the same page?
oh, that is one of the biggest reasons people call us at Brain Traffic, which,
Right.
and it's getting higher and higher up over the years within organizations. I mean, I used to get call from like the UX writer saying, I really got to get the tech writer team, to listen to me because I have research and input that is going to help them succeed. And how do I convince them, or how do I bring them on board? How can you help me create something that we can rally around? Now we get calls from like senior vice presidents of Fortune 100 companies saying, I report up through marketing, the UX team reports up through design and customer experience. We have got to get on the same page. How can you help us? So the awareness of it is rising. I will say though, what I have really seen is that there are two factors when it comes to culture around content. One of which is how big the company is, really, how sprawling the enterprise is, and that comes to associations and nonprofits and government. And I don't care what kind of company you are, how many people are you serving, and how many people are involved. And the second is, how old is the company? Because what you'll see is that organizations who were born online, Facebook, Shopify, Twitter, Spotify, Airbnb, these are organizations with very mature content strategy and content design practices, because these people understand that the internet is content, and that the internet is not, pretty pictures and technology. It is fueled by content, and that deserves the same amount of resource and strategy and attention that the other parts of getting the internet up and running require,
Right.
or products. Mm-hmm.
So content design
Yep.
for the website is all about creating the content on the website, and not just what you say, but how you say it, how it flows, the information architecture and everything. That's also copywriting as well. Is that like, because most people, when I talk to people about website content, they say, well, that's copywriting.
Yep. So there's always, I will say that there is a degree of snobbery around UX writers and content designers who are like, no, copywriting is for advertising. Copywriting is for marketing.
Yeah.
And I think that what they're suggesting there is that they would like to try to separately define, not necessarily isolate, but help people understand that there is a kind of writing where you are really working to convince, right? Or to engage, or to capture attention. And that copywriting as a skill was something that came up in advertising, right? So that, I mean, you see back in Mad Men, there's a partnership between the visual designer and the artist, the art department and the copywriting department. And that was kind of the holy partnership that came together as equals to deliver to the client. So there is, and it really bothers me, there is some disdain for the term copywriting. No, we're not marketers. Well, UX writing really as a skill is focused on, at least the way that folks are talking about it, writing for digital products. So what are the words that are helping onboard somebody when they're signing up to use an application? What are the words that people are encountering as they're navigating through this application or navigating through a web service specifically? Very, very focused on the user interaction with the product or service. That is how people are talking about UX writing. I really do like to separate out the idea of website writing from marketing copywriting. And don't get me wrong, marketing copywriting can live on a website. But the difference is we need to understand that people look for content online differently. They read it differently. They want it to, help them complete a certain task, whether it is getting something done, making a decision, comparing, etc. And if you're not taking into consideration the digital environment within which people are encountering this content, then you are missing an opportunity and not, at the end of the day, serving your end reader or watcher or listener. And so, can copywriting live online? Yes. Should you write copy as though it's going to appear in anything, a brochure or a script on TV or a letter that you write or whatever, and then just put it online? No, you really shouldn't.
Yeah, I guess from that perspective, I can see why you would kind of look at it differently. So what you're saying is copywriting from a marketing perspective is more like the content marketing style copywriting.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I think that it behooves anybody to kind of dig into content marketing in terms of what that is as well. And I really like to talk about content marketing programs versus just content marketing as like a random field or function, because without, careful planning and specific skill sets being employed, without understanding how, search optimization, both internal site and also external organic, fit into it, without understanding what happens after someone encounters your marketing content in the wild, wherever that may be, social, search results, blogs, at events, wherever, without understanding and being a part of that larger ecosystem or customer journey, it's just standalone copywriting. And it isn't, in fact, leveraging content across the marketing lifecycle. And so that is the thing that I often also will see missing, and which is why I think it's so important to consider content marketing within the larger picture of the entire customer journey, not just to the point of sale, or not even to the point of, getting the lead acquired.
Yeah, I love that, because that's a big thing, a big deal. It's something that I always talk about, is that it's not just, you don't just write a white paper to write a white paper to get someone in and get a lead on a form. That you can create content, and content marketing should be broader and should work around all the different life cycle stages of a customer, a prospect to customer.
That's right.
That and a lot of companies don't do that. They kind of separate that content marketing package out of, let's just do, that's brand awareness, that's audience building, which it should be, but it also can play a big role further down the line as well.
I couldn't agree more. And what I have seen over and over, the people within who play a role within a content marketing team or function within an organization, oftentimes are inordinately frustrated, because it's sort of like they get the leads and then the leads just drop off a cliff. They lose visibility. They can't measure anything beyond just, oh yeah, somebody signed up for our email list or somebody requested more information. And so they feel extremely isolated and like they're not a part of something bigger. And I think that is largely at the fault of leadership, who says, this is what you're going to be measured on. You're going to be measured on how much content you produce. You're going to be measured on the amount of eyeballs that hit that content. You're going to be measured on where we land in search results. As standalone metrics, those are meaningless to the success of an organization. Absolutely meaningless. They need to be considered within a larger context. But what happens then is that marketers are left chasing after, numbers that inform their activities and their output, but not actual meaningful productivity when it comes to helping the company succeed.
Right. And that's just, it's like a rut you get stuck in and you can't get out of. And that's why a lot of, I was reading a recent research report that said that a lot of writers are kind of like, their writing is kind of like so meh, kind of thing, because they're not happy, because they're always getting pushed to do so much of it so it's more about, quantity over quality and how it fits in the broader picture.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you to the sponsor of the Content Matters podcast. Ingenix is a leading provider of agile content management solutions. You can use Ingenix CMS to manage and deliver modern websites, customer support portals, knowledge bases, and more. Ingenix software enables content reuse, true mobile and multi-channel content delivery, and insightful content discovery. To learn more about how Ingenix can support your content experiences, visit ingenix.com. Here's a question then. How would you approach content strategy in an organization today? Like, what are there? Should you break it up and start in departments? Should you go one area and kind of build on it? Like, how would you do it?
This is an interesting question, because I have found, since I first started talking about content strategy and really kind of listening to and having conversations within the larger community of folks that care about customer-centric content, is that they're all looking for the right way to do it within their companies. What are the best practices? How should I get started? How should I implement this? And the fact of the matter is, companies have a million different ways that they are organized, different ways in which they are entrenched in processes. So many large organizations are going through constant, never-ending reorgs. If you are in higher ed, whether you are a giant university with 18 different locations, or an online university, or a small private liberal arts college, I mean, the myriad ways in which organizations are set up and the tools that they use and so on and so forth, there isn't really one right way to get started. I often point people to this. It's the oldest graphic, but it is to this date, to the best what I can find. Rahel Bailey created a graphic. I don't even know when, 2007, 2008, around stages of organizational maturity for content and content strategy. And depending on where you kind of fall within that growth pattern, within that journey of maturation, that can really inform where to begin in terms of, okay, we have to look at where ownership sits. We have to look at where the pain points are. We have to look at our resources and current constraints. We have to look at opportunities for growth. Then we can start to talk about, okay, well, where should content, if not ownership, then at least centralization of driving principles and guidelines, where should that sit? Sometimes it's in marketing. Sometimes there is a larger design function within an organization where it should sit. Sometimes it sits in IT. It really just depends on where the current focus of the organization is and how it has evolved over the last 30 years in the age of the commercialized internet.
Right. There's just so many different ways, I guess, you can look at it that it's crazy. Okay, so your book, Content Strategy for the Web, I kind of want to talk about that for a bit, because I mean, that was written quite a while ago, but there's still so much of it that's relevant today. Like, why is that?
Well, I think because largely it focuses on the people. I mean, that's, I wrote those first 3 chapters specifically because I knew there was going to be a large portion of the population who was going to pick it up, scan the first 3 chapters, and then be like, I get it. I get content strategy, and go try to change things. which has happened. I'm telling you, especially people who aren't specifically practicing content design or creation.
Right.
Those principles are foundational. Care about your customers. Don't crank out content for the sake of content. Content is expensive. It's time consuming and it costs money. You have to be able to set up collaborative routines with your coworkers in order to establish effective practices around ongoing customer-centric content. These are timeless principles when it comes to content online. It's nothing that I necessarily knew when I wrote the book, but the fact that it is still striking such a chord with people. I mean, I got a call 2 weeks ago from an executive vice president of a Fortune 10 organization. Somebody just handed me your book and I skimmed through the first 3 chapters and it's clear that we need to work with you. Like 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, dang, imagine if I wrote a new book. So, but I really do think it is because so much of it, and then when we really dig into, here's how you do a content audit. Here's how you do basic information architecture. Here's a way that you can approach a messaging framework. These are very, very basic tools, that are they're not going to change over time. Here are some organizing principles when it comes to putting a framework in place to be able to talk about content within your organization. It's a little bit like 2 + 2 = 4 in a lot of ways. It's not going to change unless the very nature of organizations and the way we work together change. So now, having said that, are there things that need updating? Yes. The number of times companies call me and they're like, we're ready to really start wrangling our content. We want to do a full content audit across the 500,000 pages that we have. That is nothing we recommend anymore. That's got to change. I really would like to be able to expand upon the practices of content design and UX writing. Unfortunately, Content Strategy for the Web is never going to see a 3rd edition. So I've got to, get with it and write another book. Unfortunately, I've had some, children to raise and some traveling to do and a company to run and some conferences to program. So, but, maybe one of these days, we'll see.
It would certainly be a great book to read. Even if you could update this one to add that new stuff in, that would be fabulous.
I know. Unfortunately, that's not going to be possible due to some copyright issues. But
okay.
Yeah, someday we'll get there.
Okay. Okay. What about technology? What kind of a role does technology play in the work of a content strategy?
Well, so this is an area I need to tread lightly in because this is not my area of expertise. And if there is one thing I have learned over the last many years, it is do not pretend to know the things that you do not know. I'm real good at saying I don't know. Now, but here's what I can say. When you are talking about making decisions within your organization to improve the way that content is designed, created, delivered, managed, and cared for over time, you can't have that conversation without your tech team. You cannot, because that content has to live somewhere. That content has to be structured in a way that is meaningful for internal management, categorization, tracking, governance, and then external, distribution and display, et cetera.
Right.
Trying to separate out, here are the million things we want to do with content, and then kicking it over to the tech team, like, go make this happen. That's not, like, it's going to be a broken process. And what's more, your tech team doesn't want that. Technology, that's not what they want. They want to be involved in the conversation. I will say one piece of this is that I see over and over organizations who are like, oh, our content problems have become so overwhelming. We're going to spend $800,000 on a new content platform because that's what's going to fix it. It never fixes it. It always makes things worse. And it's because they're making choices based on a bundle of features and things that they could do versus really digging into the current challenges that they face, the constraints, the real world constraints that exist, which could be resources and skill sets on the people side. And in fact, how the people who are creating and managing and designing the content want and need to use this technology. And so throwing a big, expensive technical tool or platform or suite of tools at your content problems never works.
Yeah, and I think that's the key there, is that it's not just one technology that's going to be useful anyway. It's a whole bunch of technologies you have to kind of combine together to make it work the way you want.
That's right.
So there's a lot involved in doing it. So you need to be careful how you do it.
That's right.
You have a conference coming up next week, May. It's in May.
Yes, it is next week. It's a week from tomorrow, as a matter of fact. Yep, that's Confab. That's our conference that we debuted way back in 2011. So this is our 10-year anniversary.
Wow. This is your second year kind of doing it digitally. You did it digital last year as well?
We sure did. In fact, it always happens in early May. And so last week of February, first week of March last year was when we started to kind of look around and go, what is happening right now? Is this a thing that we need to be on high alert about? And so we actually were probably 7 to 10 days ahead of our friends and families in terms of understanding the magnitude of how the pandemic was going to begin to affect life in our country and around the world. And so, people thought that we were being super paranoid because all we were doing was reading about it. Like, are we going to be able to hold this large event? So when people finally caught up, we were like, see what we're talking about? Like, it was the worst possible way to be right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
So we had about six or 7 weeks to transform this 700 person, massively complicated production live event that we've been doing for, however many years, into a virtual event. And we had never even so much as produced a webinar, an hour-long webinar. So it almost did us all in, but we pulled it off. And even now we are told by speakers and attendees, wow, I went to a dozen virtual conferences last year and you all set the gold standard. So I'm incredibly proud of my team. So we produced a second virtual conference last October, a brand new conference. And we finally feel like we know what we're doing here, just in time to not have to do it anymore. So, yeah.
Well, you never know. You could probably kind of do both digital and online or live. I think that's what Content Marketing World is hoping to do this fall, is kind of do a combination.
Yep.
Which helps a lot of people.
I think so too. And for a conference that size, which is, I think they were up to like 4,000 people, they can scale that with expenses because, filming all these sessions and then either broadcasting them live or making sure that they're available for an online library later is a pretty substantial investment. And unfortunately, that's not one with our small company that we're able to make. So the hybrid event is probably not a thing that will exist in our future, unfortunately. However, we are looking at the possibility of continuing with an annual virtual event that we would really very much like to be as inclusive as possible globally. So that is, you can imagine, is also very resource intensive, but is something that may be a little bit more feasible for us as we hopefully begin to grow again this coming year. Last year was about just surviving. This year is really just about stabilizing and figuring out, how are we going to start running and flying again next year.
Right. So I knew about the Confab conference, but the one I actually had never heard of and I saw on the Brain Traffic website was the Button conference, which is kind of focused on content design, UX writing, and it's a product content strategy. And I thought that was actually, and I would love the Confab conference as well. But this one I found was very interesting. Like, what made you decide to do a conference around these topics specifically?
Yep. That, I have had my eye on content design and UX writing, the evolution of it for years. And Sarah Richards out of the UK published a book called Content Design, I want to say 5 years ago. And the way that she talks about content design really is writing content for websites specifically. But what I was seeing here in the United States is that content strategy teams, or what they were calling themselves content strategy teams, specifically places like Facebook, Airbnb, Shopify, Spotify, Twitter, organizations that were really great about and MailChimp, organizations that are great about being very public about what's going on with their practices internally, sharing knowledge, sharing process, tools, organization, etc. That these companies were really starting to focus their content folks and dedicate them to specific product design teams. This was a big deal. And I had actually talked to folks at Facebook for years saying, why don't, because they called themselves product content strategists, saying, the work you guys are doing is really content design. Why haven't you shifted to that? And they said, it took us forever to establish ourselves as a formal practice within Facebook. And part of the way we did that was to brand ourselves as content strategists, implying that content was an asset worthy of strategic consideration, which frankly is exactly how I felt when I wrote content strategy, that it was almost more of a branding exercise for content than it was working to help formalize a field. So what then happened after we announced Button, these were two separate, these were just correlation, not causation, is that Facebook came out and said, we're renaming our practice to content design. At the same time that Shopify also announced our product content strategy practice is now content design. And now you're seeing a huge uptick in the use of content design as a phrase. Where you are seeing an explosive growth and need is for UX writers. And so we did not, however, want to produce a conference that was specifically about UX writing, because I feel strongly you cannot consider the practice of UX writing outside of or as a standalone practice from content design, because you cannot be an effective UX writer if you do not have all of that context that you're going to get with content design, which is research and content testing and collaboration in actual product ideation, requirements, use cases, design, etc. So we really wanted to pair up those two topics and present them in an event. Last year, and this I feel like is one of my greatest career accomplishments, and I point to my team as success as who was responsible for this success. We sold for a brand new conference in the field of content for a virtual event almost 400 tickets, which is and we're like a little company in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That to me is indicative of how hot the market is right now and how crazy people are for any information they can glean around these topics.
I think you don't hear, I hear about these things in passing, but I have not seen a lot of information on the web that kind of speaks to them and explains them and tells you how to do it and get involved in it.
Yeah,
so I think it's going to be a great conference.
Yeah, thank you. You'll find a lot on UX writing, actually, and I am excited about that. I think it is legitimizing the skill set of people who've been writing for websites and products for a long time, and the salaries for experienced folks are just going through the roof because they're so rare in the marketplace. But again, I think it is a mistake and a fallacy for people to be like, you can be a UX writer without really doing content design or without really understanding the fundamental principles of content strategy. I think that's a very, very dangerous path to go down for the field. And so I'm hoping that the conversation that we can help shape and spark at Button will help to inform that in a larger way.
All right. I'm sure it will. So last question for you. This has been a great conversation. How did you get involved in all this in the first place? Like what drove you to this interest in content strategy?
Well, I, a long time ago, decided I did not want to work for anybody else. I was a terrible employee. I was always trying to tell my bosses what to do, and that was annoying for everybody. So I struck out as a freelance copywriter, as a matter of fact, and was doing a lot of writing for catalogs and advertisements and helping name products and But then I, alongside of that, got a couple of jobs writing for websites. And this was late 90s, early 2000s, when people were still, for the most part, treating websites like brochureware, right? And I will tell you, the first time I ever sat in on a usability test, it changed my life. And I don't say that lightly, because I watched like, oh, people need to use this content. They don't just need to read it. They need it to be able to accomplish things online. And it just shifted everything for me in terms of how I felt about words on the web, in the digital space. And I decided, I'm going to double down in this field. I'm going to tell people that I write websites, and that is all I do. And I dug in, I learned everything that I could about user experience design and information architecture, interaction design, etc. And was able to bring that to bear then in my website writing projects. But then what I kept running into was people would call me in the 11th hour and be like, okay, all the work is done and we're ready for the words. And I'd walk in, and in the span of 1 hour, I would ask questions that would essentially just blow up the entire thing. And this happened over and over. And I kept saying, if you had called me when this project started, we could have asked these questions and done this research and connected these dots, and then we would not be here where you're handing me all this stuff with Lorem Ipsum. And so then I realized, I was like, yeah, this is more than, quote, just copywriting. Like, this is a whole thing. And so I actually reprinted my business cards back when we did business cards to say interactive content strategist, because I knew that the value I was bringing to these projects was more than as a writer. And that was in like probably 2002, 2003. And it was 4 years before I found an article online written by Rachel Levinger called The Philosophy of Content Strategy, or the philosophy of data around the discipline of content strategy. And I was like, oh, it's a thing. And then it kind of went from there.
That's great. It's just interesting to hear how you started. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. I think how a lot of people wind their way in. I did a podcast myself for a couple of years, and my first question was always, how did you come to the field of content strategy? And inevitably everybody's like, well, I was a double history and music major in college, or, I did journalism. I mean, it's just people come at it from so many different ways, but that is really part of why I love being a member of this community and practicing in the field, is that you just meet so many extraordinary, interesting people who, as a whole, care about taking care of their end user or their customer needs. And that shared value is what gets me out of bed in the morning.
That's great. I feel the same way. So I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we had this conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time. It's fabulous. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.